Welcome to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm Lou Rosenfeld. I'm joined today by Jen Briselli. Jen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. So delighted to be here.
Delighted to have you on. So, folks, you may know of Jen. Like, I keep coming across Jen's work more and more in the last couple of years, and it's not because she's shouting about it from the rooftops, but damn, it's just really interesting. Not to put any pressure on you, Jen. But first of all, Jen is going to be presenting at the second edition of Advancing Service Design. That's a virtual conference we are producing November 19th and 20th. You should be there if you're a service designer or you're service design curious. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that describes. I'm kind of one of them. I'm getting more and more into service design myself. I better be, because we have a conference and books on it.
I was going to say, you've got a lot of incentive to be at least curious, if not adjacent.
I guess I'm adjacent now. I've moved beyond curious. No, I'm an enabler. That's really what I do here.
Perfect.
But Jen, you're sort of going to be talking about service design, but really you're going to go more broadly than service design. But before we even go down that path, like, I know you from, you were at Mad Pow, greatly respected studio for many years, and in the Northeast of the United States, not just there, but you're talking to us from Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And you have your own thing, Topology.
Mm-hmm.
You got here to this podcast to talk about service design. How'd you get here?
The question, and how far back to go, right? So way back when the Magna Carta was signed. Just kidding.
I was going to say Jurassic, but all right. You do you.
I usually start this earlier than people think it should be started, but it's relevant, which is I majored in physics as an undergrad. And I share that because obviously there are lots of folks who arrive to the world of design via lots of varied paths. So if I'm one more person they hear coming from, I didn't walk in the front door, I kind of climbed through a side window. I'm one of you guys. But I studied physics because as a young kid, when you're forced to make that choice about what to major in, I wanted to understand everything. I think all of us put lifelong learner, curiosity, problem solver, all those buzzwords on our resumes. But I chose physics because I felt like it was sort of the most fundamental study of everything. I felt like if I kind of started there, that would be the right thing to have somebody else be educating me on, and a lot of other things I could kind of pick up, on my own. Later in life, somebody once told me everybody they know who's ever majored in physics does it either as an actual study of physics and they want to go on and do grad school and continue to climb that sort of disciplinary silo, or they study physics the way that people study liberal arts. And I'd never heard it put that way, but I felt that in my gut immediately, like, oof, I've been seen/attacked. So, but I share that again because I think a lot of people's origin starts with something else that becomes the trampoline. But while majoring in physics, realized I did not want to go to grad school for physics. I would have enjoyed it, but I was just too interested in other things and wanted to find more interdisciplinary things to do with myself. And I was enjoying doing a lot of peer tutoring. And I thought, well, that means I should be a teacher. So I took my physics degree and went off and earned an additional minor in basically secondary education while I was doing that, and taught high school physics for a little under a decade. And I loved it at first when it was weird and hard and I had no idea what I was doing. I really enjoyed the challenge of kind of understanding people's mental models and how they were making sense, how they were structuring knowledge, how they were acquiring information and then doing things with it in their world. And, that was what teaching was for me. After a few years of it, I sort of started to kind of feel like I was repeating every year, which you do. That's part of teaching. It was like the movie Groundhog Day. And I know teacher friends who love knowing they're going to do the same thing on day 30 every year, but building on that iteratively. And I just couldn't, after a while, I was like, this isn't going to work for me. So I just serendipitously happened to learn about the world of information design. And then with it, other forms of,
how do you run into, like were you at the supermarket and Ed Tufte was in the next aisle
actually,
or something?
I usually gloss over this piece because most people don't care. and I have the answer. I was literally at a grocery store and I bumped into a friend. It was actually a co-op. It was the East End Food Co-op in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I lived at the time. And I was in the bulk section buying my like bulk nutritional yeast or something. And a good friend of mine was also there. And he happened to say to me, Jen, I've been wanting to run into you. There's a magazine I found, and I think you'd really like it. It's called Seed Magazine, SEED. And this magazine was very short-lived. I don't even know much about it. I've tried to kind of find the history on it. But the whole premise was it was art and science, was what they called themselves. But what it really was you flipped through it and it was information design and it
Hmm.
was visualization, that field. And I was just smitten because I was obviously science, but also art and creativity. And for me as a kid, that was always those multi sides of me, like I think many of your listeners will identify with, were always present, but it was hard to find things that spoke to all of those facets at once. So this magazine made me aware of the field of information design and visualization. And so I sort of followed that rabbit hole and encountered all of the offshoots. I didn't necessarily want to go become an information designer, but that was kind of my core entry point. And so I learned about experience design and information architecture. And I was living in Pittsburgh. I had gone to Carnegie Mellon as an undergrad for physics. So I was starting to think about what I might want to do with myself if I'm not going to stay in education. And I, by virtue of proximity, was poking around CMU and found that CMU had a master's degree. At the time, I had no idea that it was as well regarded as it was. I just was really enamored with the way that they described the Master of Design,
Was this the Richard
especially,
Buchanan era
yes,
of the program?
yes.
Yep.
I actually I consider myself very lucky because I actually kind of got to straddle both eras. I was there at the tail end of Dick Buchanan's curriculum, and I absolutely drank that Kool-Aid. That is my cult of choice when it comes to how I orient myself to thinking about the practice of design. But I also was there at that time, actually, it was right like the second year he had left, he had gone to Case Western, but we were still with his thinking behind sort of fueling the curriculum. And then Terry Irwin had come in and Cameron Tonkinwise was there while I was there. So I got the sort of transition design kind of origin story while I was there too. So I feel very lucky about that. But I just love that you were like, were you at the grocery store? Actually, kind of, yeah.
I
So
was watching. Anyway,
you were like in the corner behind the like tofu or the TVP. Got it. But anyway, so from there, it's kind of like, the rest is history. What I ended up doing was applying to that program. I got in. I don't know how because, I didn't have any kind of a design background, but credit to the way the program was established. They were very encouraging for people who didn't come from design backgrounds to apply if you could demonstrate some level of, I will say, designerly thinking, which, again, side note, I think good teachers are all good designers. And if you think about the notion of student-centered learning in contrast to teacher-centered learning, I actually just said this to a friend yesterday, do the Google Ngram viewer search for the term human-centered and then do it for student-centered and see which one came first.
hmm.
So there was already some of that DNA in there for me, and I think that the admissions crew at CMU saw that, so I appreciated that. But I did that program. It was a wonderful, amazing interdisciplinary 2 years. I was delighted to realize that everything I had been doing as a teacher, Schoen's reflective practice, all of these notions, not only were they relevant, but they were core to the work, including systems thinking and information theory and stuff. So I went off with that degree. I was at a couple other places, a couple other agencies, and eventually I did land at Mad Pow. And what a wonderful place. The island of misfit toys that Mad Pow was, I felt immediately at home. So I was there for, I want to say 7 or 8 years, and kind of just over time took on more and more leadership. And so near the end, Mad Pow was ultimately acquired, the owner sold. And so we had a couple like 2 to 3 year period there post acquisition, but pre-integration, we'll say. And at that point, I had moved into the executive role. I forget what title I was using, chief design strategy officer. But myself and the other couple execs, basically knew what we were doing was building a sandcastle by an incoming tide. Very like, this is mandala type of work. But it was really, really valuable, really important. And it was also just nice to be able to kind of get a good inside look at how to run, a 60, 70 person company. Because I had never in my life ever bothered to think about would I want to do that. And then when things, of course, started to do what they do, if you follow any kind of ecological cycle, things will eventually disintegrate and release their nutrients back into the soil, and those spores will go off and start new little things. And so, myself and my business partner, Jesse, because he had also been at Mad Pow, said, you know what? Why don't we just take the pieces of this that we care about deeply and go plant our seeds in a new patch of soil and see what can grow. And so that's topology, and that's my origin story.
Fantastic. Um, I'm like thinking a whole bunch of things. Just like first of all, I have a 7-year-old senior in high school who's a physics kid and
I love it.
and is applying to CMU, and
Love it.
uh, yeah, I, just in talking with service designers for this podcast in the last few days, the origin stories come from such different places.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, I talked with a couple yesterday, Bethany Brown and Shreya Dewan, who come from industrial design, and talked to Gustavo Villeda yesterday, also doing a lot of conversations right now, and he comes
Mhm.
from the business world, franchising specifically.
Hmm.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, and so you're doing, I guess it would be called service design as work, but I think
Yeah.
you're, as we gave a little hint of in the beginning of this conversation, you're really maybe challenging that frame and stepping back a little bit further. Let's talk about that, but I'm going to make you all wait for this announcement. So we are going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. We're talking with Jen Briselli, and you are listening to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm going to give you 5 reasons you should be using the Rosenverse. First one, where else are you going to find 100 events that you can attend for free every year, 2 a week, about product management, product design, and UX design, plus a highly engaged Slack-based community of over 13,000 of your peers. What else are you going to find in the Rosenverse? You'll find hundreds and hundreds of recordings of conference presentations and community session recordings, all in one place from a single search browser interface. And behind those hundreds of recordings are hundreds of experts, people who have advanced the field, people who are your peers who are doing interesting new things, all in one place. Why else should you use the Rosenverse? We've been advancing the field of UX since 2005. You're going to find the most advanced content on such topics as design operations and program management, UX research, and a host of other topics, from climate UX to civic design to how designers can work better in product organizations. Lastly, you've been trusting our content since we started back in 2005. Whether it's our books, our conferences, our community sessions, well, we think you're going to trust the way we've brought those all together so that you can spend less time searching and browsing and more time learning and benefiting. I hope you'll try out the Rosenverse, and I hope you'll consider upgrading to a gold paid membership, because it brings you a lot more. Not only do you have access to hundreds and hundreds of recorded conference presentations, but you also get access to the Rosenbot, which is a ChatGPT 4 level chatbot that we've been training on all of our content, including our growing collection of nearly 60 books and counting. It's all there, it's all great content, and the Rosenbot is a cutting-edge way to get at it. You can try the gold membership out with a trial for 2 weeks. Give it a try. Hope you like it. Welcome back to the Rosenfeld Review, and welcome back, Jen Briselli. So much fun talking with you. You all don't know that when we take these breaks, we actually are talking, and we had a very long interstitial conversation, longer than we normally do. Normally it's just a check-in, but I think, Jen, you and I could have talked about lots of things for a lot of time. But what I want to talk about now is your talk at Advancing Service Design in November.
Hmm.
And, it's, I'll read the title, which is Learning is the North Star Service Design for Adaptive Capacity. And you've got some interesting words in that title. I mean, it's like an SEO dream: learning, service design, adaptive capacity. It's not surprising given how many areas you are interested in and how you are so masterful at putting them together. But I think there's like a certain aspect to what you're going to be covering, which is maybe stepping back even further, panning back from the service design frame. Is that how you manage to bring all those other things into and intersect with service design?
Yeah, I think so. To at least to an extent. One of the things that I always I'll say I get a teeny bit itchy about when talking with folks about systems oriented practice, right? Which I think service design is naturally. I actually think most design is, or at least has the potential to be other forms of design as well. But systems, because service design deals with service ecosystems, and at least in many places where service design is being applied strategically, I think it draws people who want to think in a systems way. And I think the practice itself requires us to think in a systems way. The challenge is where I get itchy is that when people do the zoom out, which I'm all about, I think it's important to zoom out in both space and time, um, to see, further upstream and to think about second, third, and fourth order effects and to think about the broader, further away kind of connections that you don't see when you're zoomed in. All of that is really critical. But in order to actually affect some kind of meaningful change, to design or implement an intervention that would change a current state to a future preferred state, you have to still kind of zoom back in to a local or at least smaller, more influenceable level. So I agree, but yes, and your take just now on that, because I think as a practice, service design is primed to be a place where we can be effective at a systems and a structural kind of way. But I do think you have to be mindful of the fact you can't do things from a 10,000-foot view. You have to zoom out and zoom back in. And I'm sure some of your listeners who have any familiarity with me know I'm also very big on complexity and complexity science. And I think understanding the nature of how complex systems behave illuminates a lot for us as practitioners. One of which, and I think one of the most important pieces of which, is that when you are going to get that systems view, you can't really actually do anything until you've identified some of the more local interactions or relationships or pieces that you can actually nudge or wiggle. So you've got to do both. That's what it comes down to.
So the local stuff, in a way, gives you the elements of, it's like it gives you the language and the
Hmm.
anatomy of the system, so
Yeah.
you know what you actually have to manipulate. Um,
Hmm.
so you're saying both are really important, but I don't want to get too far away from the zooming back part, because
Hmm.
one of the
Yeah.
things that I always struggle with when we talk about zooming back is the do you zoom back spatially or temporally? So you just, like we, zooming back to see that this chunk of a system is, let's say, connected to systems that, let's say, other organizations, and how
Hmm.
these things play together or don't,
Hmm. Hmm.
is kind of spatial.
Hmm.
But then you also talk about upstream and downstream,
Hmm.
and the role of time is really
Yeah.
important. And so there's a temporal aspect. Do you have to sort of look at those as separate lenses, or are they
Hmm.
really part of the same thing? How do you
Well,
navigate
the
temporal and
physicist
spatial?
in me is going to give you an answer that space and time are the same thing, Lou, but we won't go there.
Yeah, I think Heisenberg or Schrodinger had something to say
Yep,
about this,
a
right?
little bit,
About
a little
service
bit.
design.
There's a nice rabbit hole there. But I would answer for the service design angle but still both. I think the way that I like to think about it is you can peel them apart and talk about them, articulate them, whether it's through visual artifacts, mapping, etc., as separate things, because as humans, we kind of need to just to be able to make sense of it, but just to understand that they really aren't divorced. So, for example, a lot of journey or flow or chronological maps that many of us are experienced with, do the time thing well. A typical experience journey map, even most service blueprints have that chronological linear layer to them. And there's a whole conversation we could have separately about how we all do well to get outside of the tyranny of the linear
Hmm.
timeline map, but there is still a value to even working with something that is overly simplified as a timeline, because then what we can do is challenge ourselves to go, okay, here's the timeline we're looking at, say an onboarding flow for an experience of some kind. Fine, wherever you've already drawn the boundaries on that onboarding flow, what happens if you back it up, to the beginning, go 3 steps earlier? What's going on for those people, those humans, for the objects and actants in the system a little earlier than you're used to thinking about? And similarly, at the end of the onboarding flow, where you'd be at the edge of the paper and say, oh, well, okay, here it goes, it hands off to something else. What happens if you actually extend your view to look a little bit further down in time? Neither of these is about going backwards in time to like find a so-called root cause, because again, in most of the work we do, nothing's ever really quite that simple to have a single root cause, but just getting in the habit of asking what's happening a little earlier that could
Hmm.
actually be meaningful for me to design with. The material of my design practice could include things that I know are happening earlier, even if I can't control them. And then later down downstream, so to speak, we can't necessarily predict or control the future, which is a big part of my talk, which we can come back around to, right? It's much more about being able to adapt, not needing to predict the future, getting good at not needing to, because you can adapt so effectively. But nonetheless, still having the challenge of, can I imagine or anticipate what are a few steps further, second, third, fourth order consequences of things? So on the time end of things, that zoom out really just means, what would it take for us to just ask where we normally, and listeners, I'm like literally using my hands to like make like a timeline, right? What happens if you just expand a little earlier and a little later in your timeline, and see what that uncovers? And we're really good with those linear maps, so just extend them a little bit to the left and the right. But at the same time, in the non-time, but instead spatial sense, do the same thing with your spatial maps. So if you're making artifacts like ecosystem maps or relationship maps, or whatever other names you like to give to the visualizations that show spatial or regional, and I say that figuratively, not just literally, relationships between what flows between people. Is it currency? Is it power? Is it information? Network diagrams, things of that sort. Whatever you're used to looking at as your frame of reference, if you zoom it out and you expand a couple layers further, what do you see? And that helps, to your point earlier, the zooming out gives us a little bit of a bigger perspective. It doesn't give you control. It doesn't give you godlike omniscient engineer power to treat this whole thing like a machine and you can find one perfect place and engineer a change and suddenly it's all fixed. But rather it reveals things, and it reveals opportunities or affordances. That is the stuff of design. That is what we work with. And so you might find there is something available for you to work with that you didn't see before because your viewfinder was just a little too narrow.
So, obviously, systems thinking must be really helpful for you to basically have a language, to
Mm,
even have a conversation like this, and to grasp it and to do that
mm,
zooming back. Are you also finding things like information theory
mhm.
to, to at least to help you better understand and communicate things like flow?
Yes, but I say that with also a bit of a caveat, which is, I don't think a service designer who might be listening to this and who might go, this is all very interesting to me. I'm a little overwhelmed. Do I need to go study system science now? Do I need to study complexity science? Do I need to study information theory and network science? And the answer is not if you don't want to. I mean, I highly encourage it. It's fascinating and really relevant stuff, but you don't have to have the language of some of these other disciplines, because I think as humans, we actually already have a really innate means of understanding the complex behaviors of everything I'm talking about. It's part of being an alive, organic being, and evolutionary forces, make it such that we have to learn or we don't evolve. So you actually already kind of have the innate superpower to figure out how some of these things interact. If you do zoom out, you don't have to rely on a scientific or scientifically trained set of language around it. I give as a fast example, and I use this example a lot. You interact with humans all day long, and there's no instruction manual for that. When we joke about an environment where there's no
Maybe
instruction
there
manual for
should
something,
be.
yeah, right. The reality is we all actually kind of are built through evolutionary forces and social interaction to be able to navigate complex systems. So, in some ways, the language of some of the science around this just gives us, more means of explaining. But I think most of us already have the innate understanding of what it looks like. And we just have gotten out of the habit of thinking about our work in that way. We put our journey map or our blueprint down, and then we go home and we navigate a friendship or our children, we're raising our children and helping navigate something with that, or we're raising pets or whatever. And I think that the idea here is to bring some of the acknowledgement of that complexity back into the service design practice. And the reason I just harp on and on and on about learning and adaptive capacity is because that is the channel or the superpower through which that can happen without you having to go back to school and study 18 other forms of stuff, which I still highly encourage because it's awesome and it's
Well,
interesting.
you just did me a favor. You kind of solved a problem for me that is, I don't know, close to 40 years old. When I was in
Wow.
a doctoral program at Michigan, I took I may have mentioned this on the pod before, so sorry, folks, if I did. But I took a class with John Holland, who
Hmm.
was like the
Yep.
first guy to get a PhD in computer science in the United States, and he was like one of the early, deep thinkers about systems theory and uh, Santa Fe Institute guy, wonderful
Yep.
guy. I took his
Mhm.
class on complex adaptive systems,
Yeah.
and I just didn't understand a thing that was going
Of
on.
course.
I was just totally overwhelmed. I didn't understand the language. I wasn't.
Yeah.
It would have helped maybe to be a programmer, but he was using genetic algorithms a lot
Mhm.
as his the meat of the course, and that was something he
Yeah.
had invented in the late 50s. And it only started to make sense when he told stories
Mm.
like how people were starting to use genetic algorithms to evolve in ways that would help guide things like the flow of natural gas in a national grid or pipeline or network, actually. So unbelievably complex.
Hmm.
But this sort of adaptation was like a really powerful way, this algorithmic adaptation
Yeah.
to address those kinds of levels of complexity. Uh, can you give us a similar story or analogy for this kind of adaptation that you're talking about in the context of service design? Are you finding in a workspace, for example, that
Yeah.
this adaptivity is coming true?
Yeah, I think and I don't think it's so cut and dried as what I'm about to say, but I do think a lot of people tend to immediately think of one of two things. Either they think of adaptive capacity and learning as something that happens internally, how we collaborate with each other internally on our teams, or we think about how we're trying to empower it in the interventions or services that we're designing. So building room for adaptation and learning into a service where our users or customers can experience it. And I don't think those are quite so separate from each other. But, if you think about your teams that you work with, and I mean literally anybody listening, whoever you work with on a daily basis, does the way that you work with your colleagues look the exact same now as it did pre-COVID? I should think probably not. And when COVID happened, everybody was very quick to quote adapt because we didn't have much choice. And I know that's also putting a bit of an oversimplified kind of polish on this, but it's a really good example, just without much explanation needed, that we have the muscle for adaptation. We have the instinct, usually in most work settings where things are being optimized in a very kind of mechanical metaphor way, what that does as the downside of that kind of optimization is actually put some rigid structures in place that make adaptation a little bit harder. And so sometimes it takes an event like COVID, or not always on that big of a scale, some other disruption to break some of these structures, and then adaptation will happen naturally. So in some ways, people look for examples that are like, show me how people like, adapted and innovation happened. But in fact, I think it's more like it's a dam, and adaptation and learning is the water behind the dam. And a lot of times what we actually need to do is simply remove the structures that are in the way, and then it can flow. And when I do this with teams or when I'm working with clients, a lot of times it's actually about removing certain things from a process. Do we have to go through three stage gates of approval before we could try this thing? Do I need to get sponsorship from this particular leader to run this little pilot or to create this prototype or to invite some users into a conversation? And more often than not, simply pushing for some additional slack in the system, or, you know what, let me just run this experiment. It's low enough stakes. If this goes the way I think it might, we'll learn this. And if it doesn't go that way, at worst, nothing happens that is so catastrophic. It's quote unquote safe to fail. Those are the things that then start to unlock more of that. So yeah, I can
That
see you almost you want to say something.
Oh well, I mean, I like the mention of COVID as well as your dam analogy because I mean, you could look at COVID as a disruptive event that didn't necessarily force a lot of change as much as accelerate change that was already happening.
Right.
I mean, some of it was really good, some of it wasn't. I mean,
Of
I, I,
course.
I can't just at a personal level, I know a lot of people who got divorced after COVID, but they were probably on the track anyway. And some good things too. I mean, of course,
Not all adaptation is good. I mean, I
right,
actually I should probably say that explicitly. There's not a value judgment assigned to the word adaptation. You can adapt
right,
in ways that
negatively.
lead to less desirable or more desirable or neutral future states. And again, we won't get into the details, but a lot of where complexity in systems, I think, oriented ways of working really just starts to put tools in your hands so that when you start to see we are moving in a direction where we're going to find things more desirable. Let's amplify what we're doing. Let's scale what we're doing versus, oh, okay, I can see what's happening now. A result of our actions is that things are actually going south. And how early can we read those signals and disrupt that or dampen that or prevent that from continuing
It,
further?
it's a
I'll
great
give
point.
you, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say it's a great point about adaptation, not as necessarily a good thing, and I have to also then say divorce is not necessarily a bad thing, or I'm going to get
Right.
skewered, and rightfully
Exactly.
so. Everyone, I kind of knew this was going to happen. We're running out of time because there's so much interesting
Yeah.
things to talk about with Jen. We covered so much ground just in half an hour or so. Thank you for that, Jen. Everyone, you really should check out Jen's work and certainly come to her talk at Advancing Service Design, November 19th and 20th, virtual, so you can sign up the morning of November 19th and have just as great an experience as if you'd signed up for it months in advance. So we hope we'll see you there. Jen,
Mm.
can't let you go without you bringing a gift for our
Yeah.
listeners. What did you bring
My
for us
gift,
today?
my gift is a tool, a card set that is old, very old. It's called Oblique Strategies, and it was created by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt. And it was created essentially to support the creative process. I think it was made in the 70s. And it is basically a series of prompts. They describe it as over 100 worthwhile dilemmas. And it's a series of prompts that are just a few words. For example, breathe more deeply, look at the order in which you do things, ask people to work against their better judgment. Is it finished? What are you really thinking about now? Who should be doing this job? You don't have to be ashamed of using your own ideas. define an area as safe and use it as an anchor, etc. So some of these are, kind of platitudey, tropey things, and some of them are things like, what is failure? Intentionally do that. And I like this, and I offer it as a gift because I think as folks who are involved in service design, whether directly or adjacent, get more and more interested in systems practice, one of the first things people run into is that you have to approach more and more of your work in indirect ways.
Mm.
Running headlong at a very direct, goal-oriented, outcome-oriented kind of thing is less and less effective. And so getting comfortable obliquely or indirectly approaching or shaping outcomes is really critical. And I find that if you're a fan of other types of design toolkits and card sets, oblique strategies is kind of the one to rule them all. So I highly recommend it.
Fantastic. I hope we can still buy that because I might go out and get one.
You can. I know that for sure you can still get the original set or some reprinted versions of it. Sometimes they're kind of pricey, like on eBay or something, but there is a
Hmm.
website somewhere that sells them. There are also people who have just put them all online and you can like print them out. So,
We will find that for the show notes. And Jen, unbelievably enjoyable to talk with you, learn from you. I wish we had a few more hours. Maybe
yeah, me too.
sometime we'll do that. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Great to
My
talk
pleasure.
with you.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the latest Rosenfeld review. Really appreciate it. Before you go, I want to remind you that there's something you're going to want to check out if you haven't already. It is called the Rosenverse. Wonder how we came up with that name. It is your hub for all things UX and product design. It's a subscription platform with both free and premium options that has been trained and built on all the goodness that we've been putting out at Rosenfeld Media for years and years. So, what does that mean? It's a couple of Rosenverse live sessions every week that you can attend. It is hundreds of those recordings and hundreds of recordings from all of our conferences going back 10 years. And you may know that we do 4 conferences a year. It's also got this great chat bot called the Rosenbot that's trained on all of that, plus our 65 and growing collection of the best books out there on user experience. It's all there. There's some great discounts as well on books and workshops and our conference tickets. Check it all out. It's all there for you. It is waiting. It's there right now. And even if you have a free tier subscription, you're going to get incredible value from the Rosenverse and the Rosenbot. Go to rosenverse.rosenfeldmedia.com. Start it today.